I have entitled my lecture, The Ethical and Existential Meaning of Beauty. And my first subtitle is Beauty, Aestheticization, and Newness. Beauty and ethics, as well as their hidden relationships, are no doubt unfashionable subjects in today's artistic and architectural discourse. In the era that reveres newness, appealing images, and formal inventions, the ethical perspective has been pushed aside, and the ethical dimension has rarely entered recent writings on art and architecture.
Mr. Pallasmaa, sorry, you have to share the screen. We don't have your presentation on our screen.
I'm not showing any slides.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry.
The Ethical Function of Architecture by philosopher Carsten Harris of 1996, the book was published then, is a rare example in our time of the interest in the ethical dimension of architecture. Artistic quality is generally seen as a subjective and unique expression, and instead of suggesting an ethical resonance, it is expected to exhibit unforeseen imageries and experiences. In fact, beauty and ethics have been problematic concepts in the arts for a century and a half. And artists themselves have usually questioned or dismissed both of these notions. In our obsessive consumerist culture, beauty has turned into a deliberate aesthetic manipulation and seduction. Everything from products to environments, personality to behavior, and politics to war is now manipulatively aestheticized. We have entered the era of aesthetic capitalism in accordance with the title of a book by the late Gernot Böhme, German philosopher and a friend of mine, who has also pioneered in the philosophical analysis of atmospheres. This new mode of capitalism implies a distinct calculated manipulation of appearances, planned aging, and the loss of sincerity. We used to have 2 seasons of fashion, summer and winter, then 4 seasons, and now 8 seasons. Have architectural fashions accelerated similarly? I ask. Besides, today's formalist and rhetorically dramatized architecture hardly aspires for beauty and serenity, as experiences of the unforeseen, stunning, and the unheimlich, or of outright imbalance and threat, are frequently more apparent in its imagery. In the culture of attention, anything goes as long as it is noticed. During the modern era, the requirement for beauty has been replaced by the obsession with newness. Paradoxically, however, even newness turns into repetitiousness. Quote, as the new is searched only because of its newness, everything becomes identical because it has no other properties but its newness, unquote, the Norwegian philosopher Lars Svensson points out in his book, The Philosophy of Boredom. However, beauty is always connected with timelessness, as it turns out our consciousness to permanence and eternity. Quote, "The language of beauty is essentially the language of timeless reality," unquote, philosopher Carsten Harris claims. Quote, "Beauty connects us with the eternal," unquote, Jorge Luis Borges, the poet and writer, formulated this thought. My next subtitle is The Ethics of Limits. Sublime beauty was the highest aspiration of art until the end of the 19th century. But the quasi-rational and materialist consumer culture of today regards art as a cultural deviation, entertainment, and cultural and monetary investment. However, an interest in the connections of ethics and aesthetics, truth and beauty, seems to be re-emerging again. The haunting environmental and ecological problems and the consequences of uncritical technological development, such as excessive and uncritical digitalization, artificial intelligence, and genetic manipulation, are also awakening wider ethical concerns. At the same time, however, the attention is beginning to shift from the forced and noisy, but mentally empty architecture of abundance to the ways of building that are emerging in the developing world. This architecture of necessity is bound to be based on real needs, scarcities, and necessities. In these ways of building, architectural form still arises from the materials and ways of constructing, not from detached aestheticized ideas and meaningless compositional complexities. While the existential meaning is disappearing from the constructions of the world of surreal wealth, the severely restricted constructions in the realities of need still mediate existential and ethical values. This architecture of limits expresses the beauty of necessity as opposed to the limitless aesthetics and swiftly changing fashions of abundance. Leonardo da Vinci's wise advice on the meaning of limits, quote, "Strength is born from constraints, and it dies in freedom," unquote, has regrettably been forgotten. The perspective of approaching ecological, political, and moral catastrophes calls for a reintegration of the aesthetic and ethical sensibilities. At the same time, our focus needs to shift from the subjective, exclusive, and exceptional back to the universal, mental, and existential concerns. The ethical function of architecture of Carsten Harris, as well as several other significant philosophical books of the past decades, such as Elaine Scarry's On Beauty and Being Just, and Martha Nussbaum's poetic justice exemplify these concerns. Joseph Brodsky, the Nobel laureate poet, wrote frequently about the interactions of these two mental dimensions and gave the aesthetic perception primacy. Quote, "Man is first an aesthetic creature before he is an ethical one," unquote. He considers our aesthetic instinct as the origin of ethics. Quote, "Every new aesthetic reality makes man's ethical reality more exact, because aesthetics is the mother of ethics." I repeat, aesthetics is the mother of ethics. This is the poet laureate Joseph Brodsky. But for the poet, aesthetics means something more universal and autonomous than today's commercialized and manipulated beauty, serving the purposes of desire, convention, consumption, and forced chains. Brodsky's book on Venice, entitled Watermark, contains thought-provoking reflections on beauty and its laws. My next chapter title, Beauty in Science. Beauty, reason, and truth are usually seen as exclusive and independent properties and notions, but they can well share the same mental and emotive grounding. Beauty and reason seem to be equally valid approaches and criteria of judgment in both science and art. Erich Fromm, the philosopher and social psychiatrist, provides a striking expression of the fusion of beauty and truth. Quote, "Beauty is not the opposite of the ugly, but of the false," unquote. This view points directly at the interconnection of the aesthetic and ethic criteria. Aesthetic aspirations are primarily related with the world of arts, architecture, design, and styles, but beauty and elegance of thought are essential criteria also in mathematics, physics, and other sciences. Beauty represents comprehensive and synthetic qualities, and integrities, which cannot be formalized and expressed through any other means. The experience of convincing and disarming beauty is a proof of the correctness, coherence, and inner harmony of the phenomenon, also outside of art. The pure and selfless beauty of a Piero della Francesca or Johannes Vermeer painting is likely to be beyond analysis and explanations, as it penetrates every cell of the viewer. Quote, "Be like me," unquote, is the authoritative demand of great poetry, according to Joseph Brodsky, and this command applies to all art. Beauty is also a quality in mathematics and sciences. The theoretical physicist Paul A.M. Dirac argued that the theories of physics, which project about beauty are probably also the correct ones. Physicist Hermann Weyl, who completed the quantum and probability theories, made an even more outspoken confession. Quote, "My work has always attempted to combine truth with beauty. But when I have been obliged to choose one of the two, I have chosen the beautiful." Unquote. Today, mathematicians use the notion dirty proof, in the sense of ugly, of a mathematical proof which has been attained through immense computing power, beyond the capabilities of human perception and intellectual grasp. I feel the same dirtiness in architectural projects generated by computers or algorithms. My next chapter title, The Holistic Essence of Beauty. Beauty is not an added surface value on top of the essence of things, as it expresses the coherence, integrity, wholeness, and completeness of the thing or phenomenon. There is no aesthetic reality separate from the realities of things. Our current culture prioritizes power, cerebral capacity, and quantification, although emotive reactions and intuitions are often our most synthetic modes of understanding, and beauty arises from the experience of a complex entity as an integrated singularity. The understanding of atmospheres is an example of our capacity to grasp unfocused, shapeless, and diffuse phenomena experienced simultaneously through all our senses. Altogether, we tend to regard perceptions, skills, and understanding as processes that advance from details and parts towards entities. This simplistic idea of the dynamics of understanding is regrettably also the prevailing method of education. However, neuroscience has established that we grasp entities first, and they give meaning to the parts. This fact of neuroscience shakes the accepted elementarist pedagogical foundations in a fundamental manner. Students of art, architecture, and design, for instance, should first be made to encounter real and complete works of art, and only later given detailed intellectual analysis of the artistic phenomena in questions. The individual sensory experience of the work has to precede its conceptual analysis and cognitive understanding. According to the according to the right hemisphere, understanding is derived from the whole, since it is only in the light of the whole that one can truly understand the nature of the parts. End of quote. Ian McGilchrist, therapist and philosopher, argues in his thorough book on the human mind. By the way, I will send the manuscript of my lecture with proper footnotes so that you will be able to identify every study or book that I mention in my lecture. Beauty is complete judgment of a thing in the same way that we grasp the characteristics of places and vast environmental situations through our unfocused atmospheric sense. We grasp the meanings of the world as entities, not as a flood of unrelated stimuli. We grasp entities before we understand details. Let me repeat. We grasp entities before we understand details. As I enter a place, the place simultaneously enters me. Quote, I enter a building, see a room, and in the fraction of a second have this feeling about it, unquote, Peter Zumthor confesses. Beauty is an immaterial, experiential, and mental quality which suggests a distinct thingness in parentheses, the sensuous and mental thingness of beauty. At the same time that beauty arises from the integration of things, it appears to have its independent existence. As the light artist James Turrell has argued, also light can project a thingness in our experience. Beauty, like atmosphere, is a complex experiential quality which is encountered and grasped in a synthetic, embodied, multisensory, and emotional manner, rather than understood through intellectual and analytic reading. As we experience beauty, it does not remain outside of us, but becomes part of our very being. Quote, be like me, quote, is the command of poetry in accordance with Joseph Brodsky. I am jumping a bit through my manuscript in order to give my lecture in the given time. My next subtitle is Intelligence and Experience. In his book entitled Intelligence Reframed, psychologist Howard Gardner identifies 10 categories of intelligence beyond the characteristics measured by the standard IQ test. What he's pointing out here is we tend to think of intelligence as one singular thing, and that is how it's dealt with in intelligence tests. And these are the 10 characteristics that the psychologist mentions. Linguistic, logical, mathematical, musical, bodily kinesthetic, spatial, interpersonal and intrapersonal, naturalistic, ethical, and spiritual intelligences. Based on my personal experiences and intuitions, I wish to add 4 further characteristic categories: aesthetic, emotional, atmospheric, embodied, and existential intelligences to this already thought-provoking list of the psychologist. All these categories of intelligence are seminal in architecture and a wise teacher of architecture, uses this entire range of intelligences in her teaching method. It is evident that even in the creative fields and their education, the complexities of human intelligence, embodied and emotional capacities, and the essences of the phenomena of beauty and ethical judgment are hardly understood, not to speak of the complex, emotive, and largely unconscious nature of the creative process. And my next subtitle is Art and its Past. Here again, the ethical perspective enters the domain of art and architecture. Like all art, the art of building is simultaneously about the lived world and the layered histories and meanings of the art form itself. All arts carry their timeless traditions along their route towards the future. Meaningful works are conversations across time, and truly radical works open up new ways of reading and experiencing historical works of art. Picasso has opened our eyes to see the 25,000 years old cave paintings. All great artists reveal the existential essence of art through the layers of recorded history of art. Aldo van Eyck, the structuralist Dutch architect, a friend of mine, refused to give his inaugural professorial lecture at the University of Delft on the suggested topic of the influence of Giotto on Cézanne. And he gave the lecture on the influence of Cézanne on Giotto instead. This example opens up the simultaneity of the world of art. One of my closest friends was the legendary Finnish designer and artist Tapio Virkkala. He told me that his most important teacher was Piero della Francesca. But Piero died 423 years before Tapio was born. It is this amazing simultaneity of the world of art that gives us the opportunity to select our teachers from the entire history of art. And I have personally been taught by the artists of the Siena school and the Cubists especially. The Siena school meaning the pre-Renaissance or early Renaissance painters in Siena. As a consequence of this multiple time perspective, also architecture needs to have a double focus: the lived world and the mythical traditions of constructing. The highly refined technologies of today tend to weaken the deep unconscious meanings and the essential but hidden mythical and unconscious contents of building, which are echoed in all great architectural works. All meaningful works are timeless, and they are always simultaneously about the past, present, and future. My next subtitle, A Biological Perspective. The aesthetic reality has also been extended to biological phenomena. It has been well known that certain selective criteria that could be regarded as aesthetic choices, such as symmetry and signs of health and strength, are essential factors in mate selection among animals. Certain aesthetic gestures, rituals, and deliberate constructions are also used to attract a mate, such as the empty silk balloon of the balloon fly presented to the female, and the huge staged and decorated nests of the bowerbirds. In constructing the decorations in front of the entrance to the bower, the bird uses, believe it or not, false or reversed perspective to exaggerate his own experiential size in the eyes of the potential mate. Just think of it. Perspective was developed primarily by Brunelleschi in Renaissance Italy, but bowerbirds have used reversed perspective for millions of years. Another remarkable example of the role of aesthetics in the animal world is the coordinated group singing and dancing by male blue manakins. This is a beautiful bird living in Brazil, dancing in front of the potential mate. The male birds practice this crucial opera performance all their lives. A recent book entitled The Evolution of Beauty by Richard O. Prum reintroduces Charles Darwin's second book on evolution, entitled The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, published in 1871. Published, in fact, 13 years after his celebrated On the Origin of Species. Darwin published his second book after becoming convinced that the selective principle in his first theory, which was highly applauded and accepted in the scientific circles around the world, that his first theory did not explain all the variations among animal species, including the proverbial case of the peacock's tail, which had caused Darwin nightmares at the time of writing The Origin of Species. In the Victorian era, a book that suggested autonomous aesthetic choice as a sexual motive practiced by the female sex could not even be discussed. However, scientists have recently shown through mathematical modeling that indeed combining the two theories of Darwin fully explain all the varieties among animal species, including the peacock's tail. Surprisingly, individual aesthetic judgment is the fundamental principle of choice also in the animal world. And we are surely just in the beginning of opening this door. The notion of biophilia, the science and ethics of life, introduced and articulated by the biologist Edward O. Wilson, expands the ethical responsibility beyond the realm of human interaction, all the way to our duty in maintaining biodiversity. Zemir Tseki, a pioneering neurobiologist, also connects aesthetics with biological evolution as he suggests the feasibility of a theory, quote, a theory of aesthetics that is biologically based, unquote, in his book, Inner Vision, an exploration of art and the brain. With the intuition and courage of a poet, Joseph Brodsky supports the scientist's view. Quote, the purpose of evolution, believe it or not, is beauty, which survives it all and generates truth simply by being a fusion of the mental and the sensual. Unquote. This was Joseph Brodsky. By the way, I finished reading a superb book last night, Conversations with Joseph Brodsky, written by the musicologist Solomon Volkov. It's a really powerful book about the role of the poet in the society, particularly meaningful comments and views in today's world. My next chapter, beauty, empathy, and integrity. We have an unconscious capacity to identify ourselves with other living creatures, and even with objects and phenomena of our perceptions, such as human and spatial situations, and to project ourselves and emotions onto them. We fuse countless aspects of every situation and place into an atmospheric experience on which our mood and expectations are grounded. Quote, be like me, unquote, as I already said, is the imperative of the poem in Joseph Brodsky's view. We even simulate the individual characters of great novels and momentarily share their fates, lives, life situations, and emotions. Experiencing a work of art is an exchange. The work lends us its authority and magic, and we lend the work our emotions. Neuroscience has associated this act of unconscious mirroring and exchange with our mirror neurons. The great ethical value and human equality of art is that we are able to experience our own emotions mirrored by the most profound and sensitive minds in human history. We do not only reflect the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of the living, as our empathic imagination can also bring the dead back to life. We can sense through the skin, muscles, and emotions of Michelangelo, see through the eyes of Piero della Francesca, hear through the ears of Johann Sebastian Bach, and feel through the heart of Rainer Maria Rilke. As the master poet Rilke suggests in the motto of my lecture, art and beauty are not only adjectives, they constitute a very core of humane and dignified life. I had not read or shown the motto of my lecture by Rainer Maria Rilke. And this is what he writes, quote, "Art is not only a selective sampling of the world. Art implies transforming the world, an endless modification towards the good," unquote. And I'll give you another quote, also by Andrei Tarkovsky. In his diaries, Tarkovsky writes, quote, "Art is realistic when it strives to express an ethical idea. Realism is a striving for the truth, and truth is always beautiful. Here, aesthetic coincides with the ethical." And I end here, but I will send in a couple of days or maybe tomorrow the entire manuscript, which is maybe 30% longer. Thank you. I would gladly answer any questions.